What if I told you that a drought in Syria and a peace deal in Colombia are actually part of the same story? It's a story we're only just starting to piece together about the collision of climate change and global conflict. Today, we're diving into how our warming planet is literally redrawing the map of war and peace.
When we hear about conflict breaking out somewhere in the world, our minds immediately jump to the usual suspects, right? It's always politics, it's fighting over borders, it's a battle for oil or some other valuable resource. And for centuries, that's been the playbook. But what if the most powerful, the most destabilizing force crashing onto the world stage isn't a new superpower or some political ideology? What if it's something you can't negotiate with, something you can't beat on a battlefield? What if the biggest threat to peace itself is the weather?
Now look, this isn't some wild theory. This is coming straight from the top. The United Nations Secretary General calls it an existential crisis for peace and security. So let's get into it. Let's see how these two worlds are colliding. Okay, so first things first, we have to understand the actual mechanism here. How does a hotter planet actually lead to more violence? The term that security experts use is threat multiplier, and it's a perfect description. Think of it this way. Climate change doesn't necessarily light the match, but it finds all the existing piles of oily rags in a society, poverty, political instability, old rivalries, and it soaks them in gasoline. It takes tensions that are already simmering and cranks the heat until the whole thing boils over. And this isn't just a theory. The conflict in Darfur has been called the world's first climate change conflict. Decades of drought and desertification basically pushed herders into the lands of farmers, sparking a conflict that then got tangled up in politics and ethnicity. It's just a tragic, real-world example of what happens when the climate pulls the trigger. And it is happening all over the globe. This is not an isolated incident. In Chad, you've got farmers and herders in violent clashes over land that's literally shrinking. In Nigeria, Lake Chad has shrunk to less than 10% of its former size, which is a major driver of insurgency in the region. We're looking at 13 million people in Bangladesh potentially displaced by rising seas. And Jordan. Jordan is on track to be the first country to literally run out of water. This isn't some far-off problem. It's a security crisis, and it's happening right now. All right, so this brings us to the global response. We basically have a deadline, a red line that scientists have drawn in the sand to avoid total catastrophe. Let's check in on how we're doing. So, back in 2015, the world came together and signed the Paris Agreement. The goal was crystal clear. Keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, but really try to limit it to 1.5. Why 1.5? Because that was seen as the guardrail, the point beyond which the impacts become truly irreversible. Well, here's the cold, hard reality check. Based on our current path, we're not on track for 1.5 degrees. We're not even close. We are currently hurtling towards a world that is nearly 3 degrees warmer. I want you to let that sink in for a second. This isn't just missing the target. This is a catastrophic overshoot that will completely reshape our world. And you might be thinking, come on, what's half a degree? Well, it turns out it's a world apart. At 1.5 degrees of warming, we lose most of our coral reefs. That's awful. But at 2 degrees, they are 99% gone. Poof! Species loss gets 2 to 3 times worse. An ice-free Arctic summer goes from a once-in-a-lifetime event to something that happens every decade. That half a degree is the difference between a crisis we can manage and a catastrophe that manages us. So yeah, the situation is incredibly serious. But this is where the story takes a turn. What if the very thing driving all this conflict could also be the key to unlocking a more lasting peace? It's a whole new playbook. To understand it, you need to know about the two main tools we have. First is adaptation. That's basically defense. It's dealing with the impacts we can no longer avoid, building better seawalls, creating irrigation systems for droughts. The other side of the coin is mitigation. That's offense. That's stopping the problem from getting worse, ditching fossil fuels for renewables, cutting emissions. You absolutely need both. So here is the game-changing idea. For all of history, peace agreements have been about ending the fighting. Ceasefires, new borders, who gets to be in charge? But what if we started weaving climate solutions directly into the fabric of these peace deals? What if ending a war and building a sustainable future became the exact same mission? And the amazing thing is, this isn't just a nice idea on paper. It is already being put into practice. Let's look at some real-world examples of this in action. Check this out. In Colombia,
Their historic 2016 peace accord included a national irrigation plan specifically to deal with the droughts that were fueling conflict. In Nigeria, a local peace deal focused entirely on creating a shared plan for water access to stop the violence between herders and farmers. And in the Middle East, there's a wild proposal called the Green-Blue Deal, where Jordan would build solar farms to power desalination plants for both Israelis and Palestinians, turning a shared vulnerability into a foundation for cooperation.
When you lay them out like this, you see the blueprint emerge. Every single one has a clear climate mandate. Each one uses a specific adaptation strategy, like managing water, as a practical tool for building peace. And the most important part? They're all built around mutual benefit. This isn't one side helping the other. It's everyone working together because they have to survive.
Now, obviously, a plan this big needs resources. So the big question is, where does the money come from?
Well, the answer is the green economy. Just look at this number, $2.6 trillion. That's what was invested in renewable energy in about a decade. The amount of money flowing into climate solutions is absolutely staggering. It makes traditional peace-building budgets look tiny. The opportunity here is to steer just a tiny fraction of that cash into the places that need it most.
And you need an entire coalition to make it happen. You've got the private sector looking for ESG investments. That's environmental, social, and governance. You've got huge players like the World Bank shifting their entire strategy around climate goals. You've got governments with their own national plans. And maybe most importantly, you have groups on the ground actually building trust and making sure these projects work for the local communities.
So how do you make all these different parts work together? The report uses this brilliant analogy of a Rubik's Cube. You can't solve it by just turning one side, right? Everything has to align perfectly. You need action at the right level, from a single village up to an entire region. You have to be in the right phase, whether you're preventing a conflict or rebuilding after one. And you need the right track, getting everyone from top-level diplomats to local community leaders on the same page. When all three of those axes click into place, that's when you solve the puzzle. I think this quote from John Kerry just nails it. The challenges are enormous, we know that, but the opportunities to innovate, to build new alliances, and to completely redefine what it means to build peace, they are just as clear. We have the tools.
And that really leaves us with one final massive question. We've been talking about how climate change is a threat multiplier, how it makes everything worse. But maybe, just maybe, by forcing us to cooperate, by unlocking trillions in investment, and by demanding a whole new level of creative diplomacy, could our biggest threat actually become our greatest opportunity for peace?